Good morning, everybody. Thank you guys for coming. And excited to see a lot of people here talk about something you've probably never heard of. And that's pretty awesome. Welcome to Workflow Tools for the Win at PFIZER. Presenting today are me, myself, I'm Tim Holt, and Dave Hall. Let's get this thing started. All right, let's talk about who we are. I'm Tim Holt. I work for Acquia as a technical consultant in the professional services division. Prior to that, I worked at Warner for 5 years and ran their Drupal and Magento platforms. Also, I am a Drupalist. I am a systems architect, usually for high-level type stuff. I also specialize in large-scale migrations, and I get this a lot, especially people at DrupalCon that have had a little too much to drink at like midnight. I'm not Dries. Here's Dave.
Hi, I'm Dave Hall. I'm an IT consultant. I currently work as a web platform strategist at PFIZER. I'm a Drupalista. I really enjoy hacking on web apps. I'm a sysadmin, and I'm generally known as a fat, opinionated alternative to SVN. So before we get started, I actually have to go through this to keep the PFIZER lawyers happy. So I'm going to be talking about all kinds of stuff today, but PFIZER may or not be using what I'm talking about. They may not continue to use it. And if you do anything that I talk about here today and it causes you problems, it's your own fault for being stupid for listening to what I had to say. So tune out now. Okay, now the lawyers are happy, I can get on with the presentation. So some of you may think that deploying code, content, and configuration in a coordinated way through multiple environments is the thing of fairy tales. Well, today I'm going to tell you a story that's actually real, not a fairy tale. So once upon a time, a little boy called Dries lived in Belgium. I'm not sure how old he is, but this is Dries with his little pet bunny rabbit. And while at uni, Dries had a little baby called Drupal, and he's Dries' little baby. Drupal started to grow up, and like many kids, Drupal started doing odd jobs here and there. In high school, Drupal got a part-time job. Eventually, Drupal went to university, and after graduating, Drupal got a job in the media, and serious media organisations started adopting Drupal. One day, a big corporation rang Drupal and offered Drupal a job. On the first day, Drupal turned up for work, but it was clear that Drupal didn't quite fit in. Drupal was used to doing everything on production. One day, the boss called and told Drupal to go buy some new tools. Whoops. Sorry about the dodgy clicker. Drupal started searching for new tools. And unlike most times you buy stuff on eBay, Drupal's new tools arrived the next day. And Drupal's boss was impressed. And they deployed happily ever after. And that's the end of our story. That's the end of our session. Thanks for coming. Okay, so what was in the toolbox that made Drupal's boss so happy? There was UUID, which is Universally Unique Identifier. Drupal 8 Core has UUID baked in. For Drupal 7, it's in Contrib. And what UUID allows us to do is to track a piece of an entity from between multiple environments. So in dev, it might be node 3. On stage, it might be node 6. On prod, it might be node 5. And we need a way of identifying the node through those multiple environments. And to move them between the different environments, we use the deploy module, which uses UUID and services to be able to push the content between the environments. We use drush on the command line because drush allows us to revert features, run database updates, do all that stuff that you get RSI from if you do it clicking a mouse. Then there's features for exporting configuration. I'm assuming that pretty much everyone in this room knows how features work, so I'm not going to bang on about it. Then there's Git. All the code and configuration is kept in version control. Then there's the rules module, which allows us to react to things happening within the system. And most often that's triggering Jenkins jobs. And then we have custom entities for keeping track of everything. These tools allow Drupal to do things very differently. And now I'm going to hand over to Tim, who's going to talk about how Drupal does things differently.
All right, thanks, Dave. So let's start. When Drupal was a little bit younger, code goes up and content came down. You guys probably recognize this workflow if you've worked in Drupal for any amount of time. The dev, stage, production, 3 environment scenario is what we're pretty much used to. And we're also used to creating code either locally or on development and then promoting that code through different environments up to staging, then up to production ultimately. On the flip side, usually we create content directly on production. If you are doing a small site or a blog, you just write a piece of content and publish it. You might be more sophisticated and use something like workbench moderation, which gives you a really great approval and workflow process. If you're really sophisticated, you might look into something like SPS, which is built from the CSI initiative that LSD sponsored, and being able to preview your content in context. Again, this all happens on production. The challenge is that this created some problems, right? Drupal realized that looking at content on staging, a little bit difficult, right? Because if I'm putting all my content in production, then I got to sync it back to staging. I may not do that very often. I might have other things on staging that I don't want to wipe out, etc. So looking at content on staging, it's difficult. Another thing is there's not an easy-to-read log of every change that I'm making. So if I'm committing code to Git, then of course I've got my Git commit history, right? I've got branches if I'm using a good branching model, which we all are. But I've got all my code in one spot, but my log of changes on my content is completely somewhere else, right? If I'm doing revisions, if I'm using workbench moderation, it's not a really easy way to see it. And even if you create a view and have a consolidated place to see it, it's still very separate from where my code changes are. Drupal also had difficulty looking at a single change on its own. I think we've all had this scenario where we're developing probably 3 or 4 different features locally, and then we're ready to push that up to staging because we want to see it on staging. And we might be showing 2 or 3 features on staging, and then somebody comes along and says, I just want to see this one change. I don't want to see these other changes. Then we go through a big process to try to figure out, okay, I just want to get that single change on staging, and again, it's difficult. I also realized that, hey, we can't bundle content and code changes together. Let's say I've got a code change that introduces a new content type. How do I test that? Well, I'm going to be creating content on my local machine. Then when I go to push that to staging, I'm going to be creating test content again on staging. Then I have to push that to production before then I can engage my whole content workflow of creating unpublished nodes and draft states and all that kind of stuff. So again, it's very non-intuitive. Deployment is often an all or nothing event. We all use staging the right way, which is that we push all of our changes to staging and push that wholesale up to production every time, right? Yeah. What often happens is, again, you'll have 4 or 5 changes sitting on staging, and all of a sudden somebody says, oh, we have to get this one change up to production. So you end up doing a lot of work to get that one change out and push it to production, where that's usually your first test of pushing that single change anywhere is when you push it to production. And that's because deployments can't really be easily tested if you're trying to do single changes. Also, another challenge is different permissions and configuration per environment aren't really possible. All right, this all made Drupal pretty sad. He's got kind of a sad face there. Gets me a little choked up. Okay, so Drupal decided to change how things were done. So this is a different workflow, and you'll notice we've changed a few things here. We've added a new environment, you'll notice in the pink, called integration. And then we've added multiple dev environments, and I'll get into what that looks like in a minute. But the big idea here is that we've taken both code and content, and we've decided to push them in the same direction. So we have a consistent workflow for both code and content. Drupal discovered that arbitrary sets of changes could be bundled together. And then we decided to call this a job. So now, with a job, Drupal can take a content change and a code change and put them together so they can promote them through environments at the same time. Now, Drupal can also approve the changes in the job every step of the way and log what's happened. And this is important because if you want a single consolidated place where you can see, here's where my code changes in my environment, here's who's approved it, and also the same exact workflow for content, then this is what you need. Essentially, think of workbench moderation for your code. Drupal also gave each job its own dedicated sandbox. And this is also a scenario I'm sure we are all familiar with, developing in a completely isolated sandbox. Now Drupal can preview content in context on any environment. A great thing, too, is Drupal can now push several jobs to the staging server, but only push a single job up to production when it's ready. And a bonus, Drupal now tests deployments at every step along the way. Because we're doing this in a coordinated fashion, deploying to your integration environment, deploying to your staging environment, deploying to your production environment is the exact same process. And so if you have a hiccup, you'll have it at integration. Drupal can create, edit, preview, and push content all without logging into production. So this actually gives you the opportunity to do hands-off deployments in Drupal for both code and configuration and content. All right, now let's tell another little story here. Drupal has a little cousin, and I'm not talking about Backdrop. Let's call Drupal's cousin's name is Job123. So Drupal needs to make sure that Job123 is safe on its epic journey through the environments. So to start with, Job123 started off as something just as a twinkle in somebody's eye, probably someone from the marketing department. And so what happens first? Drupal spins up a new dedicated sandbox just for this change. And we're going to put it at someplace called job123.dev.site.com. This is essentially a full copy of the production environment for this site in its own dedicated sandbox where a developer can go and make changes. Then what happens next, Drupal creates a job123 Git branch. It checks it out on the sandbox, so my sandbox is immediately ready to start committing code to a branch that's dedicated, again, to this particular issue. Drupal then creates a job123 deployment plan to track the content changes. What's great about this is we use the deploy auto plan on the sandbox to essentially any change that we make to any entity on the sandbox then gets added automatically to the deployment plan. So it's called auto deployment plan, and if you look at the description, it says it auto magically adds stuff. And it really does that. It's pretty cool. This enables, if you're a content editor and you're just going in to edit content on your sandbox, you don't even have to think about it. You just save stuff, and then it automatically adds to your deployment plan. So Drupal then goes in and makes changes to the content or the code, or both in the sandbox. Again, we can bundle them together. So once it's done, now job123 is big enough to move up to the next environment, which we call the integration environment. So what happens here? Drupal merges the job123 Git branch into the integration Git branch and pushes it up to the integration server. In this model, we're assuming that every environment has a dedicated Git branch. So the integration server is always running your integration branch. The staging server is always running your staging branch. The production server is always running your production branch. So then moving code in is just simply merging branches into those branches. Then Drupal triggers the job123 deployment plan to be pushed up to the integration server. Again, this is done via Drush and Jenkins. We push not only the plan up, but we actually move the plan. So we don't just deploy the entities, but we actually copy the job123 deployment plan up to integration. So from integration, we can then deploy it again to the next environment. So once everything's on integration, Drupal just sits back and looks at the changes that have been merged into the integration server and says, you know what, job 123 is ready to take the next step to the staging environment. In workflow tools, this is done by a little button that says propose for staging or propose for integration, which you'll see in a minute. Once it's on staging, the exact same merging and approval process happens before being pushed to production. And what's great here is, again, all of the statuses of my job are tracked by Drupal. So I can tell at a glance whether a job is sitting on my integration server, whether it's sitting on my production server, whether it's sitting on my staging server, and who needs to come along and approve it to get to the next point. Drupal can tell at a glance which jobs are in which environments, which are ready for approval, all from a central management console. And this is a very crude graphic to give you the idea that we can have multiple jobs sitting in individual development sandboxes, and we can push certain ones of those up to integration, certain ones up to staging, propose a single one to go up to production. This management console is the heart of what Workflow Tools is. It's a Drupal site that provides the workflow and the window into seeing this process work. So meanwhile, PFIZER heard about what Drupal could do now. At PFIZER, Drupal worked pretty hard. Drupal ran about 300 sites or so at PFIZER, and each week brings around 3 new sites to the platform. PFIZER really needed Drupal's new toolbox, and Drupal's boss at PFIZER was impressed. All right, so I'm going to hand it back over to Dave to walk you through a demo.
Yeah, so that's enough talking about what WF Tools is. I'll actually show you what it looks like now. So this is the site screen. So we support multiple sites. So if you've got a network of sites, you can manage multiple sites through the one interface. So I'm going to go into Advil. And on here, it's just got some basic information about the Advil site. And now, if I want to add a new job, I would go into the Add New Job. Before I go create a job and stuff, I should show you that these are all entities. So we have a job type, and within that job type, it's a fieldable entity. So if we want to add any additional fields or change the order of the fields or anything like that, it's all controlled through the normal Fields UI. So the whole idea with WF Tools is that it's not a system where we impose onto you the system. It's a framework, so you're able to add additional fields or change when certain events trigger in the workflow process. It's very flexible. I could spend hours talking about how to configure it, but I'm just going to run through with a pre-configured setup today. So I'll actually switch to the video because the Jenkins jobs actually take a little while to run. Oops, hang on. That was something I was working on earlier. Where's my video gone? Okay, so here we go. All right, so here I'm on the Advil page. I go over and click Add New Job. Sorry for the people up the back that it's a bit unclear. The video will be online so you can watch it again later. So now I go in and add the details of the job, give it a name, then the external reference, and some details. The external reference is completely pluggable, so say you use a ticketing system, you can put in the ticket number and it will actually link through to the ticket in the UI. And here it's pre-populated the site for us down the bottom as well. this was recorded over the hotel Wi-Fi, so things were a little slow. So now it's created our new job, and then I could create, say, 20 jobs all at once, and then when I'm ready to start work on one of those jobs, I'd hit the start button. And what that will do is actually kick off a Jenkins job. So rules will pick up that the job has been started, and it'll kick off a Jenkins job to go build a completely new doc route on a sandbox server for us. So it'll clone production, it'll check out a new branch based off production, it'll clone the production database, it'll copy all the assets from production as well. So it's a completely isolated setup. So here it is creating the branch. So exciting watching someone else drive Jenkins, isn't it? So here, that job's completed, it's successful, and it's showing that the new job 4 branch has been created. And then that actually triggers off the deploy sandbox job. And for those of you who like watching grass grow, I've got the extended version of this video where it deploys the whole thing. But we'll just have a quick look at what it does here. So this is actually running on CloudBees, which is a hosted version of Jenkins. You can run it on any Jenkins instance, or you can use your own CI server. It's completely pluggable. And so now it's copying all the code over to the server. And we'll just oh, hang on, that paused it. There we go. And it's finishing off the running of the job here. It's creating the new deployment plan and everything, so it automatically tracks everything as the changes are done, and we've got success down the bottom. And now we go over to our job4.dev.wf demo. Give it a sec, and it should load. There we go. So there's a completely new instance of a cloned instance of our production site. I can log into it. If you want to, again, it's completely pluggable. You can write a plugin so you can use Drush ULI or something. So the person just hits a link in the management node and it'll log them straight in, so you don't even have to worry about creating accounts. So we log into the site. And then we go create some content. I'll create a basic page. Here we go. We'll put the title in. And put the body in. Include a typo. You've got to have a typo in a live demo. And then hit save. and in a second we'll have our new page. Okay, there's our page. And now next I'm going to place a menu block using the context module. So we'll go do that. So there's the existing context. We'll add the block. So we'll add the navigation to sidebar second. We'll save that. And then we'll go to the command line and actually export, re-export the feature. First we'll show that it actually works, and then we'll re-export the feature. Exports the feature. We'll diff the file, and then we'll commit our change and push it up. And I'll just show you that the node we created was tracked by the automatic plan. See the random pages in our plan. So it's like it's looking over your shoulder all the time. So this is the site. Whoops, I've still got the video at double speed. I'll go back to normal speed. So we've got the branch here. And this will show us the diff of the change. And there was a block taken out and the navigation block added. And now we'll go back to the management node, the right instance of the management node. There we go. And now we'll propose for integration. And again, that will kick off a Jenkins job. First, I need to propose it. So I asked someone to review the changes. The whole idea is nothing gets to the next environment without someone reviewing it. And put a comment there so the reviewer actually knows what they're being asked to look at. The theme that we've got here is called Start Work, and at the moment we're in the final stages of polishing it. We will be releasing the Start Work theme and all of the WF Tools enhancements in the coming weeks. So pretty much everything you see here will be freely available. And now this is the reviewer. They're making a comment and approving for integration, which in a second will kick off our Jenkins job, and we'll just speed things up a little bit here because you didn't come for a presentation on watching grass grow. So there we go, that has successfully deployed. And the video is dodgily edited. There we go, yeah. Success. And here we go, we will refresh our stage site. Give it a second. And there we go. The navigation block has been added to the right side. And I'll just check what the URL is and then go have a look at the page to show that that's deployed as well. And here we go. There's our random page. So that's how easy it is to move stuff around with WF. I'll just go back to our presentation. So this really moves from that all or nothing big releases where, you bundle up all your code changes onto integration and then do the weekly update or whatever it is to the website. This actually allows you to move towards a rolling release model, which gives you code, content, and configuration moving through those multiple environments in a coordinated way, which really allows people to go from an idea to production in an afternoon with multiple levels of sign-off. So that's pretty much it. I always say they all deployed happily ever after, which is the end of our story. So we've got a bit of time left for answering questions. So has anyone, if you do have questions, there's the mic there in the middle, so just come down and we'll do our best to answer them. And if you want to learn more or connect with us, there's the details. We'll leave that up during questions.
Thank you. My mind is kind of blown right now. This is like really, really cool.
Thanks.
So I have two questions. First, I'm trying to relate this proposed workflow to what I'm used to, which is develop on local, push to dev, through staging to prod. And it kind of seems to me like these dev instances are kind of like the new local where you're actually developing content or something like that. So what would be can you explain the relationship between integration and staging?
Yep. So first, the dev sandboxes. Like if you're making small changes and you're comfortable on the command line, you can just go in there, make the changes and commit it and push it up like you saw in my demo. And also you can make all the content changes because you actually need to track the changes for deploy to be able to deploy it. But you are free to work locally and you can pull the database down from the sandbox server, work locally, make all your changes, push it back up. It really depends on how developers are used to working and how comfortable they are doing that type of thing. The reason why we have the multiple, we have integration, which is pretty much for the devs to integrate their work and check it and make sure it deploys properly. And then to get it we get it to preview, which is then for business people to go have a look at it and go, yeah, that looks awesome, I'm going to approve that for prod. And it also means that we test the deployment multiple times before it hits prod, because you don't want to have the first time you're testing a deployment is when it's going into production. But the whole system is completely flexible. Like if you wanted to have 8 environments to push things through, I'd think you're crazy, but you could do it. If you wanted, the minimum is 3. You need dev, you need an integration, you need prod. But that preview step, just make sure that you've really got things nailed before it's going through to production.
Yeah, and for a place like PFIZER, there's a hard requirement that production and staging or preview are exactly identical in every way. So the integration environment gives you essentially a second staging environment to really, for the developers to actually check and make sure that they're getting what you expected.
That makes sense. Yeah, I can definitely relate to that with the clients really wanting staging. They don't want any hiccups on staging. They want to be able to go in there and see exactly how it's going to be. And dev, or I guess in this case, integration is a great place to give a trial run.
Yeah, and also like if you do a git merge onto integration and you've got a conflict, you resolve that, but you want to make sure when it goes to preview, you don't have a second conflict, because, if it goes to prod, the prod deployment breaks, and then, you've got to get the super glue out, which isn't much fun.
Sure, thank you. Okay, and second question is, let's say, my dev shop, or maybe even just on a specific project with a specific client, we were interested in integrating some of these workflow changes. Do you see it as flexible enough to allow kind of a slow or partial adoption to where, let's say, some content is still being updated and changed on production? And also, let's say, maybe some developers are still just creating feature branches, if we follow Git flow or whatever, and are still pushing those straight to either integration or staging without sort of using the whole Jenkins workflow of creating a sandbox?
Yep. You could look at doing that. Like, the whole thing is that WF Tools is a layer that sits on top of a whole lot of best practice tools. And so you can pick up individual components from that and use it. I just strongly believe that WF Tools ties together a lot of best practice in an easy-to-use way. But you are, like, one of the things we're going to be doing at PFIZER is trying to retrofit this to hundreds of sites. So it's not, you go from, nothing to having everything running on this in one day. It's a whole process. It's a lot easier with greenfield sites, so.
Right.
And, and another thing too is that this model basically eliminates the idea of pushing a database upstream at any point.
Right.
So your site has to have at least some groundwork in place to make that be able to happen. I mean, so we've done a lot of work with deploy to make it compatible with lots of different entities, lots of different node types, third-party modules, so that we can push lots of things reliably via deploy. But that's a pretty big limitation. So if you're used to, even from like dev to stage, pushing a database up, like you need to be able to have your site architected in such a way that you can put everything into code or everything's deployable. So, because again, we never push a database upstream.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really great presentation, guys. Thank you so much.
No worries.
No problem, thanks.
It was fun delivering it. Okay.
I have two questions, and first one is about the merges and merge conflicts. How do you resolve them, and on which state you notice them?
Okay, so part of this, like, I firmly believe you can't solve all problems with technology. You need your team, understanding how things work, and also to not do stupid things. So, if they try to do a deployment and they get a Git conflict, the deployment fails, they will be able to go through the log and go, okay, code merge has failed. I will do a merge of what's causing the conflict into my branch, resolve that conflict, and then push it up. So it's just the same now. Like, if you're doing feature branching and there's a conflict, you have to resolve that manually anyway.
Yeah. Part of the other idea too is that we try to bite off small changes with these jobs, so that in theory you have a little bit less of a shot of creating a conflict if we try to piece things out into small pieces. When you obviously are first developing a site, then right now we're just developing an entire site in a single job and then pushing that up for the initial version. But generally that's the only place it happens where you've got a lot of complex things happening in a single job. And by keeping it very segregated, it helps ease that transition. And obviously you still need to communicate. So, PFIZER oftentimes has different vendors working on the same site. And so there's still communication required between the teams on some level to say, hey, we're fixing this, or we're updating this piece of content over here. You guys don't mess with it over here. So there's still like the old-fashioned side of it, like Dave's saying, we can't completely solve everything with the technical solution, but that approach helps at least somewhat to. You're not going to ever eliminate the possibility of a conflict, but you at least help mitigate it a little bit by biting off smaller chunks.
Okay. Okay, that's clear. And another important thing is how we roll back in this scheme.
Under this model, the only time you roll back is if you have a deployment that completely breaks an environment, which, given that you're deploying through multiple environments, you should never break prod, in theory. But as we all know, prod there's always a risk, but this tries to minimize it. But say you get something all the way through to production and it's been through multiple reviews, and someone goes, oh, that word, instead of there being spelled THEY apostrophe RE, it should have been THEIR, then you just create a new job and run it through the process again. Like, once it's got to prod, that's it. It's live.
Yeah. And one other thing that we actually haven't talked about yet, but that we're still in progress on with this solution, is a way to have dual environments running at every point. So in theory, we're obviously we're doing integration and preview and prod all on Acquia, but the idea is that we've got two prod environments, a prod 1 and a prod 2, and you're always deploying to the inactive environment and then running smoke tests to make sure, like, yes, this is good, and then we'll flip the domain name using an API call so that now we're pointing at the inactive one that got the deployment is now active. That gives you a chance to, if that fails, that gives you a chance to stay on the active one that was still working, or if you switch and there's a problem, you can switch back. And we're still determining like what the hard rollback period is for that. Like, okay, after 24 hours, then we're good. But that also helps mitigate the risk a little bit for really complex deployments.
Yeah, it's the standard blue-green deployment model.
Yes, I think I need to be more specific. For example, we do weekly releases and we gather some features. And let's say I have a feature with new content type, so I push the changes in the code with new feature, and also I push some demo content so people can review it. And that's like one package that I go for. And in the end of the week, everyone was planning that, yes, it's feature ready, but last moment we found some bugs, but it's already there. And we need to roll back that specific feature, and we need to roll back also content related to that feature. If in case of the code, I can understand that just changes, we just remove some code. How about the content?
So this is solved by the job model because you no longer have the big weekly release with everything bundled up into a release. Each single thing gets deployed to the next environment when it's ready. So that your feature, which may be decided that it's not ready, then it just doesn't get propagated to the next environment.
Yeah, and that's also part of the advantage of having individual sandboxes for development. So in theory, we've laid it out where we want the business people to be do their final approval on staging, but that doesn't mean that they're also not looking at your sandbox and making sure that you've actually done what, as a developer, you've done what they're asking to do, that you've created the content that you need to be created. So we still fully expect that there's some level of approvals and oversight going on in the development sandbox where it can be isolated on its own. And so hopefully if you've had it checked there, then you've checked it on integration, then you've checked it on staging. By that point, staging, you really want to catch anything, and at that point, if you haven't caught it by the time you've gone to production, then that's where you roll another job and update it and fix it at that point, or roll back the code, or obviously there's some manual things if you're in an extreme emergency that you need to take something down that you can get into production and take something off and unpublish some content or whatever.
Yeah, it's designed to stop those oh my god moments with things.
And then one other thing I should mention too. So one of the other things that we've been doing a lot with deploy is not just, so deploy by default always deploys to the default revision of a node or an entity. That doesn't really work in this model. So if you've used deploy where you've got a single content server and then you've got a single production server and you're keeping track of your revisions like on your content server and then you're just pushing the final up, that's okay, but that's not, the way we're doing it here is we're essentially at some point destroying that content staging server because the dev soundboxes at some point go away. So what we're doing is we're actually pushing every single revision up through production. So your production, if you've created 5 revisions of a node on your sandbox, all 5 of those revisions go up to production, you see them all. So if you're in an instance where I have to revert a piece of content back through your revisions, all those revisions are available to you on prod as well.
Yeah, that's nice. And another thing, how big jobs are. I mean, some bug fixes can be pretty small and they should go fast.
Yeah, it can be like one character change can be a job, or you can have a whole new section of a site. It's really down to how you want to organize your work. The smaller the job, the faster it's going to go through. So there's an incentive there to break things up into bite-sized chunks and just push them through.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right. Michael.
So yeah, I'm just trying to come to grips with the moving content around. We're doing content delivery with node export. So the model that you just said, the staging site, production site, content to code, and then run it through the pipeline. And then there's in Drupal 7, UUID is not really fully baked all the way through, and so you have certain things of like content type that has a taxonomy field, multiple select, and the taxonomy terms don't have UUID by default, I think. And then you have, how do you, like as you move, right?
No, that does actually work. Yeah. So what happens is UUID translates the UUIDs on the fly. So you've got a node with a taxonomy term reference. Yep. When that node is being deployed by the deploy module using web services, I'm not talking about the UUID features module. I don't advocate using that. But when you export the entity with deploy, it goes and has a look at what all the dependencies are for that particular entity and converts the dependencies IDs into UUIDs and picks all of that up and deploys it through in a coordinated way. So it does it, and then on the other end, it grabs all the UUIDs of what's coming in and goes, is this new or existing? If it's new, it creates it. If it's existing, it updates it.
Right, this might be less the distance between node export and deploy, right? Because in node export, it does the same thing that you described, except I think that you have to kind of like help it along the way in certain areas.
Well, we've been doing a lot of work too on adding UUID support for different entities, some stuff that aren't even really entities, but just adding support so that it's all done with the entity UUID like load or pre-save or save hooks. So it's easy to define like a custom module and say, I mean, we did this for instance, with web form. So web form is not something that, it's not real entities like web form components aren't entities, web form validation rules aren't entities, but we needed a way, a ton of the sites at PFIZER are built on web form, so we needed a way to be able to deploy those successfully. And so using the pre-save hooks and the load hooks, where on the load happens on the source server, so at that point you're translating any hard-coded NIDs into the UUID, and then on the flip side, when you're saving it on the destination site, you're translating it back to the new one on the destination server. And that's not perfect, and it was never intended to be perfect, but it does work, and so you can take things that aren't actual revisionable entities and still deploy them and have it work predictably. So the whole system's kind of based on that.
And it was never intended to be perfect?
No, so something like web form was never intended to be perfect because we really want people moving to like entity form, for instance, that supports, it's a revisionable entity out of the box. So I mean, that's actually a great segue to like some of the things that I think if you guys want to get involved, one of the things that we're doing on Friday is we're going to try to have a WF sprint as part of the sprint. We're going to have a table there. And the other thing is, this system, and honestly, like a lot of the SPS system as well, if you guys are familiar with that, these things really depend on like good, solid, revisionable entities in Contrib. And so that's something that I think, as we move forward as a community, I think we all want to work towards making everything work that way. The more the entities that work with UUID and are revisionable, the easier it's going to be to do this kind of stuff. And also, one of the things that we're working on is really just kind of like a safe list, essentially, of modules that we know work with this. And obviously, there's some that don't yet. There's some that we're really interested in making work. There's other ones that, it's just going to be really difficult to ever make it work seamlessly, so without a whole bunch of, rewriting. So we're trying to put that list together. We've got a list internally at PFIZER already that we're trying to use, and we're going to publish that. It's soon on the website. So, but that's an area that we're all got to continually work on to make this stuff really seamless.
And also with Drupal 8 coming, CMI is going to make configuration deployment a lot easier. Having UUID baked into core is going to make things easier. And web services in core. There's all this stuff that's going to make stuff so much better for this model in Drupal 8, but we want to still make Drupal 7 really solid. So when it comes to rolling this out for Drupal 8, we understand where the pain points are and try to fix those. The stuff that can't be fixed in 7, we want to fix for 8. So,
Awesome stuff. It's great.
Thanks. Any more questions? Left you speechless. Great. So that means you should all click the link here and go say really good stuff about us. And if you hated our session, close your eyes, don't look at that slide. So if there's no more questions, we'll wrap things up. And yeah, we're here for the rest of the week. And as Tim said, we're going to have a table at the code sprint just to, roll some patches, test some patches, and that's for the complete WF stack. So UUID, deploy, WF tools itself. So yeah, come along and help make it better.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.